Morning. I knew she wouldn't, but she didn't mention she mentioned Facebook, but not her live stream videos that she was doing. Did anyone see that? Is anyone connected to Sarah's chaplaincy page? It would surprise you if you'd known Sarah over the years, which many of you have, to see her getting up and doing live stream Facebook videos on our very cheap cameras, our very cheap phones. They were very, very popular and encouraging for families and kids and all sorts of things like that. So, done a great job. Yeah, keep an eye out for our next thing coming up. But good morning. Yeah, good to see some familiar faces and some new faces. Just really great. Both are really great to see in the church. So as Sarah said, yes, we have this year been preparing for the end of one season for us in life. It's been a significant season. Both the roles that we were called to, and don't use that term lightly. We really felt a strong call into those roles out at Kingsthorpe 4.5 years ago, and as Sarah's already said, very, very clearly, both feeling that same sense of call out of these roles at the moment. Now looking to embark on a new adventure with army chaplaincy being a big part of that. As Sarah said, been serving in the reserves in army chaplaincy throughout the second half of this year, which has been really good. Really love getting into the physical fitness training and that sort of thing in it. You know, obstacle courses, been a couple around the place with that. Trekking through the bush one weekend during an exercise with the unit, which was pretty exciting. Otherwise, it's just been a great experience entering into a new environment for ministry, and it's a real ministry environment with a whole new different group of people to what you generally come across in our church environments or even in our small community that we've always seen ourselves ministering to out there as well. I've been surprised really just in these first few months of the regard that a lot of people in the military have for chaplains and the service that you bring to a unit. There's a level of respect, with the rank that you hold when you already enter in. But I had one guy come into my office recently and explains, though that rank is one thing that he knows to respect, he says I also acknowledge the higher calling that padres come in with. They see you as the God guy in the unit. There's no shortage of God conversations to have with people when they raise the topic, which they're not shy to in that environment, funnily enough. But which is what I really love about it. Getting to have those sort of conversations with such a broad range of different people outside of church, really. Being the God guy, I sometimes get requests to pray for things for people. The borders have been pretty significant this year, particularly with these guys in the military who, many of them from out interstate, who have families and all that they haven't been able to see for a long time, really desperately wanting to be able to get home for Christmas, and they're just not sure if they can or not. So that's been a big need that they've really wanted. A couple of people have prayed for, or not prayed for, asked me to pray for them for. It's great when you get people coming to you, isn't it? I'm sure we've all experienced it in some way when people ask us to pray for some of these things that, those things that mean a lot to them, isn't it? It's a real privilege. I'm sure you've had many people asking you to pray because they know you're a Christian, someone who goes to church, someone in touch with the big guy upstairs, I've had some people say to me at times. And it's a real privilege to be an intercessor in prayer for those people who we know who don't know God themselves. To be someone who can talk to the big guy upstairs for people. So Matt's asked me to bring a message this morning as part of a series I think he started last week, is that right? Following the Way, how following Jesus changes everything. I think I saw on Facebook there. And he does, doesn't he? Jesus really does change everything for us. Following Jesus puts us in a privileged position, of knowing God, being able to pray for people who don't as well. But I wonder, is that the key thing that we've been called to do? What Jesus wants us to be for people? Or is he looking for something else, something more than just being an intercessor for people? The God guy or the God girl who can pray to God for people. So we're going to see what we can discover about this through the story that we're going to look at this morning, that our Bibles often title The Faith of the Centurion. This story is recorded in both Matthew's and Luke's Gospels, their account of Jesus' life and ministry. I'm going to read from Luke's version of the story this morning for our message today. Luke often expands upon a few of these stories, and he includes a few extra details that I think really tap into this story a bit more. It's always been one of my favourites to read, Luke's Gospel, not because of the namesake. I really have always loved how Luke really puts an emphasis on Jesus' ministry, about Jesus just coming to save sinners. And Luke really, really presses in on that. These sinners who Jesus came to save included the immoral, the sick and disabled. There was always thought sin connected to their infirmities, and all those who seemed likely, or they judged as being on the outer with God in the minds of the religious people of the day. Jesus pretty much came into the world saying to these sinners, I've come for the likes of you. I've come to show you that God is for you, not against you. Like you've been made to feel like he has. In this story about the faith of the centurion, we get to meet a different sort of character to these ones that we generally see throughout Luke's Gospel that Jesus is reaching out to. Another one whom Jesus has come to save. He's not a lowly person, living in destitute conditions in the world. This guy's a highly exalted Roman authority figure. So let's read about him in Luke chapter 7, you'll find this. Luke chapter 7, from verse 1. It says this. When Jesus had finished saying all this to the people who were listening, he entered Capernaum. There a centurion's servant, whom his master valued highly, was sick and about to die. The centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. So a centurion is an army commander, funnily enough, who's in charge of around 100 soldiers, thereabouts. And being a Roman, we're to just assume that this guy's an unbeliever. It would just be assumed, people hearing this story and actually seeing this happen when this was happening. So not a religious person in the ways that the Jews were religious, but he's an unbeliever who has heard about Jesus. So this unbelieving Roman official sends the holy men he knows, the religious people he knows, the God guys that he knows, to go and find this miracle worker, Jesus, so he might come and heal the centurion's servant who it seems that he really cared about. And the way that the centurion sends the Jewish elders off to seek Jesus' help for him, I think it's not unlike the way that people come to us asking Christians to pray on behalf of them, for something they're in desperate need for. Could be for the borders that people come to ask you to pray for a loved one who's sick. There's all sorts of things, isn't there? So these Jewish elders, they go to be intercessors for the centurion in seeking out Jesus' help. And reading on here from verse 4. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him. This man deserves to have you do this, they say, because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue. So Jesus went with them. He was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends to say to him. So these aren't religious intercessors anymore. The centurion isn't getting the religious people he knows to plead his case to the divine miracle worker at this point. He's sending his friends now. And these friends, they're not given the task of pleading the case for the centurion to convince Jesus to do what he needs, what he wants him to do. They're only there to relay the centurion's own words. Now I want you to hear these words as the centurion's words, and notice how they sound a lot like a prayer, I think. You know, Jesus is not physically present to where the centurion is, or visible to the centurion as he speaks these words which are relayed through the centurion's friends. Lord, he says, don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. And notice the difference between this and the way that the Jewish elders tried to intercede for the centurion. They tried to convince Jesus, expressing how deserving and worthy the centurion is to receive Jesus' favour and mercy for his dying servant. I think I do that sometimes. You know, when I'm praying for other people, you know, I might fall into the habit of trying to convince God that why he should do this thing for that person. Anyone else notice that in their prayers for people sometimes? But it's different when we pray to God for ourselves, isn't it? It's different when we hear the words of the centurion to Jesus. His own words express how undeserving, how unworthy he is before Jesus. Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. This is why I do not even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes. And that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it. Being a man who possesses a great deal of authority in the world, the centurion, he understands the power that authority carries to make things happen. I just say the word and things happen, he says. But somehow, for some reason, you know, maybe he's desperate, I don't know. But the centurion, he recognizes the authority that Jesus possesses in the world. You know, though he's a prominent man himself in the world, the centurion before Jesus sees himself as nothing compared to him. I don't deserve, I'm not worthy before you, he says to Jesus. And from what he's heard about Jesus, he knows that Jesus has the authority over all things in this world, including sickness. If Jesus has that sort of authority, all he has to do is say the word and his servant will be healed. This coming from this unbelieving, highly positioned Roman authority figure. In verse 9, we see Jesus' reaction to what he's hearing from the centurion. It says, when Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him. And turning to the crowd following him, this would have been the religious crowd following him. If it was us in this day, we would have been following Jesus and seeing what he's going to do to you. Turns to religious people and he says, I tell you, I have not found such great faith, even in Israel. Then the men who had been sent returned to the house and found the servant well. So what does this story tell us about what Jesus is looking for in the world? I have not found such great faith, even in Israel, he says. Tells us something about what he was looking for, doesn't it? When he came into the world. I have not found such great faith even among the religious people, he's saying. But I've found exactly what I'm looking for here in this non-religious person. The faith that reaches out to God to seek what he desperately needs in his life. That's what he really needed, this guy. He just reached out to Jesus. You know, when the centurion sent the religious elders to Jesus to intercede for him, they tried to convince Jesus why the centurion was deserving and worthy of his favour. But when the centurion spoke, when he used his own words, which we hear through his friends, he says, "Lord, I know I'm not worthy. I know you have authority in this world, greater authority than even I possess in my prominent position. You just say the word, and I know my servant will be healed." And it was the centurion's own words. That's what amazed Jesus. So what did Jesus come into the world looking for? He came into the world looking for people who would show such great faith as this. People who would simply put their trust in God with that sort of confidence. That's what faith means, trust. It becomes a very religious word for us, faith. Trust. I wish our Bibles would just say trust, actually, because I think that better gives us a better picture of what they actually mean by faith. And this is the way that Jesus came to save people in the world. He knew that this is the only way that we could be saved, by trusting. According to the story that's given to us in the Bible, everything that's gone wrong in the world stems back to one faithful decision, back what we read right at the start of Genesis, that humankind made in regard to God. The decision not to trust him. The decision to try things another way, our way. To turn our backs on God, to live as if God doesn't exist. That's the root of where everything comes from, according to the story in the Bible. Trying to live according to our own wisdom, our own strength. Thinking that we have the power and the knowledge to make our own way in this world. But it all just gets bad for us, doesn't it? In this way that we so ignorantly and blindly plough into in life. There's plenty of terrible stories in the Bible. It gets pretty ugly in parts. And it's explaining the consequences, the result of this decision that we've made that leads to misery and pain, death. A life that's not really life. Like Jesus spoke about, we're walking around as if we're not even alive. That's the story of our history. Beginning back at creation, where God created the first people to live what's described as paradise. Paradise in relationship with God. To live in that dependent trust in God. Just believing what he said and just trusting that that's the best way to go about things. Well, we chose not to trust, didn't we? It wasn't just Adam and Eve. We can't just cast the blame on them. The story of them is the story of us. We've all made that same decision ourselves. We've been choosing not to trust ever since. So this is the story of our history. But in this story, the story that we have in our Bibles, there's a point in history where God himself came into our world in the person of Jesus. He came to call people back to what we were always intended to do and to live like. Called people to come back to faith, which is back into that relationship of trust that we're always made for. And the story that Luke tells about Jesus in his gospel is the story about how Jesus came to call not only the religious to this faith in God, but all people. He came to save sinners. That means Jesus came to call all people, doesn't it? Because we're all sinners. We know that, don't we? That's what Jesus came into the world looking for. It's what God is still looking for in this world. He's looking for all people, not just the ones that sit in this privileged position to pray for people. He's calling all people to turn back to him. And it's why Luke gives us these stories that he does about the sinners, the immoral, the sick and disabled. And now there's Roman Centurion, because he's telling this story about how God has come ready to welcome, accept, bless and heal, answer the prayers of all who would reach out to them in their time of need. So what is God looking for from us, particularly? Those who already know God, the God people, the ones who we've talked about, who people can come to ask us to pray to the big guy upstairs about the things that they need prayer for. It's a privilege to be able to do that for people. It really is, isn't it? It's a privileged position to be in. But I don't think God is wanting us to hold on to this privileged position so much for ourselves, or to have that mindset that we are the privileged ones in God's eyes. Matt wanted me to talk about how following the Jesus, how that changes our perspective in life from this story. And following Jesus has certainly done that for me. I can say that very confidently in many, many good ways. That has changed the course of my life, my family's lives. It's just changed the way I see people, the way I see the world. But I have to admit, joining the inner circle, so to speak, of Christians, has also brought in some things that have crept in as well that I don't think Jesus ever intended as part of this. Pride at times, arrogance, and self-righteousness. All those same things that we see in the religious people who Jesus confronts in his ministry, aren't they? But what I love about following Jesus is the way that he always brings us back to where he wants us. Even though we creep out and these things slip into our lives, he's always there trying to steer us back and bringing us back in some way when we keep our eyes on him. And that's what following is, isn't it? You can't take your eyes off someone that you're following. When we open our Bibles and read about Jesus in the Gospels, stories like this where Jesus lifts this Roman centurion as the sort of person, this is someone who would have been as far as you could imagine from being a right-believing religious person. But Jesus lifts him up before us, before the religious people, and says, see this man here? This is a man of great faith. Someone you could actually learn from instead of being an intercessor for. It's humbling, isn't it? What it encourages me to do is to step out of my presumed privileged position of being the God guy before people. I'll still pray for people if they ask, but I'd also like to encourage them to pray to God themselves in their own words, in their own way. And I'm sure their prayers would have a whole lot more effect than what mine would for them. Because it's their prayers that God is really wanting to hear, isn't it? He wants each of us praying to him, reaching out to him, believing in his power to save, his heart to hear us, his compassion to respond to our prayers, our needs. Not trying to pray any fancy religious prayers, but praying with the simple faith of the centurion in this story. So I'm keeping it pretty simple today. I'm not going to close in prayer. I'm not sure if that's a general thing that happens, but I think as we've been looking at this and considering this, I won't close in prayer for you today. Instead, I like to encourage you to say a simple prayer of your own personal prayer to God as the worship team comes up to lead us in our last song. Thanks, guys.